Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. Here's wishing you a great morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today I'm going to talk about the Sebastian Rogers case. Please hit that like button if you want me to continue covering the case. And now, without further ado, let's get started. Sebastian Rogers, as a male teenager on the autism spectrum, faced a significantly higher risk of being harmed or unalived by a parent compared to neurotypical children, which just means children who are not on the autism spectrum. Autistic children also have a significantly higher risk of going missing compared to other children, but normally this is due to the child wandering off or eloping, as they call it. We know that Sebastian either wandered off, was abducted, or was possibly unalived and hidden somewhere. I want to talk now about an autistic child's greater risk of being harmed and or unalived. A 2021 review in Aggression and Violent Behavior reported that parental stress, lack of support, and societal stigma can contribute to the risk of violence against autistic children. According to a white paper entitled Homicide Incidents Involving Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder as Victims reported in the U.S. News Media 2000 to 2019, children with autism are at an increased risk of maltreatment. The authors of this paper, which I found on the National Institutes of Health website, examined news articles on homicide incidents involving children with autism as victims in the U.S. between 2000 and 2019. Of the 52 victims that were studied for this particular white paper, 47 or 90.4% were male. So if we consider this particular study, Sebastian being a boy also increased his risk of being mistreated and or unalived. Unfortunately, his age was also against him. The age of victims in this study were between 2 and 20, and parents and caregivers accounted for 63.5% of the perpetrators. If all of these statistics hold true overall, no matter what the year in the United States, then we can say Sebastian, as a 15-year-old male on the autism spectrum, was, whether he knew it or not, at a greater risk than kids without autism for either being DV'd or unalived by a parent or a caregiver. And unfortunately, having a stepfather with an unhinged temper, allegedly, if we are to believe Chris Proudfoot's fourth wife, Nina Gomez, then that was likely yet another factor that could have put Sebastian at greater risk of harm. To me, these percentages should be considered when we try to figure out what happened to Sebastian. Now let's talk about some of the other statistics that were cited in this white paper. It says that the leading injury mechanism for the 52 autistic victims studied was gunshot wounds, followed by drowning, followed by asphyxiation. And the most commonly cited contributing factor for autistic kids being unalived was the overwhelming stress from caring for the child. Sebastian, according to Chris and Katie Proudfoot, was dealing with incontinence issues, namely bedwetting, and having issues at school wetting his pants. Depending on how often this was happening, it could have led to a lot of added stress for Katie and Chris. Things like having to rush fresh, dry clothing to the school, or having to change the sheets on Sebastian's bed at night. Whether or not it's right or wrong, it could have caused them some stress. And this is not to justify any mistreatment or alleged mistreatment of Sebastian. My fear is that Sebastian didn't always get the patience and the kindness from Chris Proudfoot, and I base that on what his fourth wife, Nina Gomez, said about him and how he treated her and her kids. And ironically, if Sebastian was being mistreated in any way, it could have led to the incontinence issues. So it was probably a vicious circle, and he likely didn't have the ability to stop the problem. You know, to me, it's always sounded like Chris Proudfoot blamed Sebastian for his incontinence, as if he could control it. Chris also had issues with how Sebastian cleaned his room. If Sebastian didn't meet Chris's standards, then Sebastian was in trouble, from what I've heard. It just feels like Sebastian was probably always walking on eggshells, trying not to tick off his stepfather. Let's get back to the research and the white paper. The research also indicates that kids with autism spectrum disorder are more likely to have parents with pre-existing psychiatric disorders, such as schizophrenia, social phobia, and a personality disorder. If one of Sebastian's biological parents does suffer from a pre-existing psychiatric disorder, let's say being bipolar or something else, that could be another factor contributing to Sebastian's disappearance. Families who deal positively with a child with autism are the ones that use available resources. They tap into what's available to help them cope, as well as family members cooperating with each other for the child's well-being. Unfortunately, I don't think that Sebastian's parents were cooperating with each other. We know that Seth Rogers, Sebastian's biological father, and Katie Proudfoot didn't always play nice with each other. And we know that Seth was not told about all of the Child Protective Services reports that were opened for the Proudfoot home, allegedly. Seth has said he learned things about Sebastian's family life with Chris and Katie after Sebastian disappeared. So although he might have thought they had open dialogues about Sebastian, it sounds like a lot of things were kept from Seth. You know, and Seth Rogers has also been accused of some not so nice behaviors when it came to Sebastian and to Katie. This white paper also said that, quote, the challenges faced when caring for children with ASD take a substantial toll on caregivers and parents. And as a result, children with ASD may be at increased risk of being neglected, abused, and exposed to harsh parenting as compared to the general population, end quote. And according to the U.S. Department of Justice, of young people with disabilities, those aged 12 to 15 had the highest rate of violence victimizations among all age groups. Remember, Sebastian was 15 when he vanished. In addition, research indicates that the risk of premature death in children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorder is 2 to 10 times as high as in the general population. The authors of this white paper looked at details of the circumstances leading up to the unaliving of an autistic child. They discovered that the majority of the perpetrators were mothers and stepmothers, followed by fathers and stepfathers. And I have to point out, Sebastian was home alone, allegedly, with his mother, Katie, on the night he disappeared. Now, the average age of the perpetrators studied for this white paper was 38 plus or minus 11 years. Katie Proudfoot is currently 35. Chris Proudfoot is 41. And Seth Rogers is 48. Again, the average age was 38 plus or minus 11 years. So the average age ranges from between 27 years old to 49 years old, and all three of these parents fall into that category. Let me share some more statistics with you from this study. It says that 9.7 of the perpetrators studied had a mental illness diagnosis, including depression and something called reactive attachment disorder. In case you don't know, like I didn't know, reactive attachment disorder is a rare condition that occurs in people who have experienced severe neglect or abuse in early attachment relationships. It affects the person's ability to form healthy emotional bonds. So Katie Proudfoot was allegedly essayed as a child. Could she suffer from attachment or reactive attachment disorder? I think there's a strong possibility of that. And if she does suffer from it, would it have made it easier for her as a mother to agree to get rid of one of the major stressors in the Proudfoot home, Sebastian? And if she was pressured by her husband, Chris Proudfoot, and she didn't want to lose that relationship, would she have agreed to do something? We know they wanted him out of the house. They were thinking of sending him to a boys' school. They were also trying to get him into Seth Rogers' house full time, although that was taking time because Seth was having trouble getting Sebastian enrolled in an online education program. So just another thing to think about when it comes to the disappearance of Sebastian Rogers. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you next time on Bed Crime Stories. Love you guys.